Yeah, it was a good time, honey, under the sky. Yeah, it was a good time, honey, just you and I. Feeling alright.
Hey, welcome to All Wheels Podcast this week. I'm Evan, and I'm here with Max and Brady as always. What's up, guys?
How you doing?
How's it going? Happy Tuesday.
Well,
Yeah,
happy
it is
Monday
Tuesday.
when you will receive
When you're
this.
listening to this.
Oh, yeah, right. Happy Monday.
But we are working on our weekly recording schedule of Tuesdays. So
Yeah,
that's the
good.
plan at the moment, is record these on Tuesdays, and you get them. Right now, we already are have next week's done already, so you'd be hearing this one in 2 weeks. But we'll see. We're trying to stay ahead of schedule, so I'm sure at some point we will need to use our episode recorded ahead of time. But for the moment, we're 2 weeks out. Anyways, yeah. So welcome back. Hope you've heard some of our previous episodes. This is number 8. And we're live on just about every podcast platform you could find now. So that's really cool.
I'm pretty certain we're live on all of them, at least all the ones.
I mean, there's got to be some obscure, like, like North Korean podcast
Right.
app we're not on.
I'm pretty sure we're not on that one.
Well, I mean, maybe tomorrow.
We're going to have to dig a little deeper for
Like
for those.
Kim Jong casts, we might not be live on yet, but we'll get there. Like, we just have to submit it.
Yeah.
yeah, I guess you're
After
right.
we have 600,000 followers.
Yeah, we're working on that.
Yeah.
But it's cool. We're live on Apple Podcasts and Google and Spotify and in the search engines for all those. So that's awesome. Allwheelspodcast.com is up, and you can always see the latest episode there, and you can stream it there if you want.
If you feel like looking at us.
Yeah,
Which
the
honestly-
video version's there.
Yeah, it does bring a little bit more comedy into it too. I think so, at least. But I mean, there's a bias I think there. But
Who's funny looking then?
I
mean, where's the comedy come from?
Maybe it's just me.
Well, after you shaved your mustache
I
off,
tend
you
to-
got
Yeah,
way,
since you got
you
rid
got
of the
way less
mustache.
funny.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know if you guys can tell, but
What? Are you growing it back?
well,
what's
I mean,
going on? We're working. I can see 2 pixels of you right now. So I don't know. I don't know which one's your face and which
no,
one's the mustache.
I'm one shave into a mustache and a 5 o'clock
Good.
shadow.
Good job.
All right, nice.
I think
It's
you should
coming
rock the mustache.
I honestly, I love it.
Do it.
I'm
yeah, if you
keeping
can
it.
You gotta
pull
own
it
it.
off, do it.
The mustache started to own me for a little bit, or it started to wear me, I should say, for a little bit. So.
That means it's a good one, though. That's the real deal.
Yeah.
yeah,
I did a mustache once for Movember, like full month, full mustache, like the real thing, and I looked like a freaking pedophile. It was
Yeah.
so bad. It was
Yeah.
so
But you
bad.
can see you have like the Magnum PI style. You could rock it. Yours will be just magnificent. You can see it in your like beard shadow.
Who are you talking
Oh
to?
no, Evan.
Evan.
Yeah,
It's like
no,
thick.
a mustache?
Yeah, I can see it. Like
No. Well, maybe if you like trim it right, but I had this guy. I mean, we're talking just here.
oh
This is it. And I looked so gross.
no,
It
you
was-
got to rock it all the way down.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't do the whole deal. I
It would
should
look
have.
great.
Oh, it was so bad. Like I would be at like out and people would like pull their kids away, to be like walking down the
Yeah.
street. It
I'm
was
not
the
gonna lie.
filthiest stash known to man.
Since I'm the only one that actually listens to this podcast, I just heard you tell this story
What
on episode 4.
I did?
Yeah, It's
Mustache
exact-
story?
Yeah.
Do
this
we
is
have the
on
same conversation?
This is almost verbatim the same conversation.
Oh my god!
What?
Okay, we
I
gotta
just
work on
haven't.
new content.
I
Guys.
just
That's-
haven't mentioned Tom Selleck
Jesus,
yet.
episode 8. Episode 8. We're already reusing.
Yeah.
I think there's a glitch in the matrix.
This is a bad sign. I don't
Yeah.
remember that at all, but
I don't remember it either.
Yeah,
It
I
felt
probably
fresh.
wouldn't have had I not
just listened to it all.
heard it. Yeah.
That's funny. We were probably talking about your mustache.
yeah, we
Brady,
were
and
probably
then
talking about yours and got on the same topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is exactly
happened.
how it played out. Like from start to
Holy
when I
shit.
cut you guys off.
Wow.
Is
Yeah.
exactly how it
Welcome
played
to
out.
episode 4.
Yeah. So,
All right, hey, whatever. Come on, we're only 8 in. Like, you give us a break.
Yeah, I wonder how long
this is
we
gonna
can
be
keep
perfect.
saying that. It's like, come on, guys, we're only 500 episodes.
Plus
in.
we-
It's
Give us a
every
break.
time Brady grows a new mustache. Hey, Brady, nice mustache.
Oh, I was just gonna say. Plus, we drink when we're doing this, and I just realized I don't have anything to drink. I might have to.
Yeah,
go
you're
get
looking
one somewhere.
thirsty over there.
I know.
Yeah.
It's like the Sahara over here.
Oh, I got some more juicy bits going down the hatch. It's really doing the job.
Oh, I bet we can get.
I got
bet
one
we can
back
get
up today.
Weldworks to sponsor us.
We should. Weldworks is still my favorite beer around here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. What else? What other news? Yeah, definitely check out our website. I mean, there's not tons there to see and anything interesting other than our episodes, but our contact is there. Our email's contact at allwheelspodcast.com, and definitely shoot us an email or something if you want to say hi or you want to suggest a topic or something or comment on some of the dumb shit we said. That'd be great too. Or correct us on something. Like, that would be cool.
Do you know, that's something actually I wanted to maybe like, and I haven't brought up to you guys yet, but maybe we can do it live. Maybe once a month, or like as like corrections come into play, we do like a what's in the shop segment where we do kind of, I don't know, correction time where we either receive some corrections of some information that we maybe got wrong or left out something too, because that's I mean, we still like inquire.
I'm all for it. Half of the
yeah.
point is to like learn some new shit too. So
absolutely.
if we say something dumb and you've got good input on it, then please let us know.
And
Do you mean
we
by?
are-
Do you mean?
great.
Do you mean by
Definitely.
corrections when I sell my electric Fiat and get a '72 Chevelle?
Well, that's a correction I would like to see you make. Actually, yeah, you might be overcorrecting if you do that, but that's fine.
I'm just glad that my future HHR is safe.
That's it. I
From-
know.
Don't worry.
from,
I can't say anything.
Literally nobody
can't
wants it, so it's
say
very safe. Nobody
Safe
will
from
buy it, so-
scrutiny is what I'm saying.
Totally.
You're not once you own it. You will be. I will personally demolish you for your choice in transportation.
Yeah. Well, it's for a reason.
What is the reason?
I didn't need to follow up on that. Okay.
Yeah.
Because there is no good
Just
reason.
opening doors here.
Jeez.
Look
Cool,
at-
you gonna
with
park
that-
it. You gonna park it next to your PT Cruiser.
With that dad hat and your mustache,
No.
you're going to be driving to town and country before you know it.
Oh,
no,
nice,
honestly,
nice.
likely a Pacifica because I'm kind of into those new
I can
ones
see
right
that.
now.
I could see you in like a Buick Roadmaster, station wagon or something too.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, like, I am just such a sucker for station wagons, and
They are
honestly, like,
kinda
the
cool.
funkier they are, the better for me.
Yeah.
I don't know why, like, they still make plenty of station wagons in Europe. Like, why?
Yeah, but here in the U.S., you cannot get a legit.
no, they're all
station wagon.
crossovers.
Yeah,
like
and
that
crossovers
market.
are bullshit. I
I really don't like them.
I grew up in the third row,
Yeah.
rear-facing seat of a Ford Taurus.
Yeah.
What was that?
wagon.
What was that
And
Dodge
it was awesome.
muscle station wagon that was out for a while?
Oh, the Magnum.
the
Magnum.
Was that
No.
what it was? No.
Yeah.
Is that what it was called?
Yeah. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure.
No, you're right.
Yeah, that was kind of
Super
freaking badass.
That was
like
awesome. Yeah.
They
It was
only
like
made
the
that
last-
for 4 or 5 years, right? It wasn't
Yeah.
around too long.
Yeah.
it was
what
the Magnum.
sucks
Yeah.
about them is they never put a manual in them.
Oh, that would have been
No,
cool.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
bet somebody has though. I bet. somebody's built a
I've seen it.
badass one.
Yeah, I've seen it done.
Those
but
are
yeah,
sweet
I mean,
cars.
honestly, like
Like,
that's
Two-
like a
2005
future.
to 2008. That's it.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Based
Wow.
on
They
the
were
300
awesome.
and the Charger body style.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that third gen
Wow.
Hemi, I was definitely one of those that gave it shit when it came out because I was like, oh, that's not a real Hemi. But they're really they're solid motors, and they've really proven themselves too.
Dude,
but
I
in the
drive
world
one.
of LS,
I totally
of
drive
course
one of
they
those.
take over. But those third gen Hemis, and the aftermarket's really starting to as far as swaps go. I think Holley came out with a standalone ECU for it too.
Oh, cool.
So I can definitely see that motor getting a lot more attention.
I bet those things are dirt cheap by now.
I
right?
wonder if you could even. Now
You
I
can
just
get
kinda
those
wanna
motors
buy
for
one.
so cheap. Oh, you mean the
No,
Magnums?
Magnum. I mean, right?
Surprisingly not. They're somewhat desirable. Like $15,000 to get into a good one.
Whoa!
Yeah.
I wouldn't pay $15,000 for
I
a
know,
Dodge
that's
product
the
of
thing.
2007.
Well, now it's it's old now.
So the V6 you can
Damn.
get cheaper, much cheaper. But the SRT Magnums, those ones are. It's kind of the one you want, but
What did you get with the SRT package on a Magnum?
I think it was like premium and like larger rims, wheel package.
I swear they had like 20s on them. They were nice,
Yeah.
man.
Dude, here's
and
one for
that- and that
$5,500.
What?
Yeah.
Is it V6?
I just on cars.com. I was just looking up.
Send it over
like-
to the
like
send it over to the
classifieds.
Discord. I want to see it.
$5,500 for a 2005 Dodge Magnum SE, 111,000 miles. Look at this Haas. Here's one for $79.95 for a 2008. I bet these are like base.
These are
model.
all base models.
Yeah, they're probably
Yeah.
nothing special, but you can
Yeah,
get
because the
anyone
one you
cheap.
want, the one.
Oh,
you
this
want
is the second
has-
generation.
has
Anyway,
the-
you want the first gen.
I don't think so. It's the 2005.
dude, you can.
They didn't make them before that, did they?
Yeah, so
Or-
this is V6. I mean, the one you want is the V8. I mean, you can always swap one in, but like you might as well find a V8 at that.
There was
point.
definitely two body styles. I don't know if this is the first or the. I think this is.
So
Yeah,
there was,
one
they
one
made these
looked the
before
body
2005?
styles was one looked like a rental car and the other looked cool.
Yeah, that's it. This one here is the rental car looking one.
Yeah,
Oh, so what was the older?
I
one
don't
that
know
looked
the
around?
years, but they definitely look different than that. It has like wider and flatter, squarer.
I mean,
front end.
imagine if they kept that going, like because they're putting the Hellcat motor in everything now. Imagine a freaking wagon Hellcat. Similar to like the Cadillac SVT or what is it? SV
08, Evan.
SVT or whatever. They
08
put
is what you're talking
what was it? LS3 in those? Or no. That was the LT whatever. It was the supercharged LT motor. And
Cadillac had
wagon.
a wagon.
Yeah, with that supercharged. I think it was a
interesting.
twin screw LT motor.
Oh, the SRT8 was 425 horsepower,
Dude, wagons are cool.
6.1
man.
liter. Interesting. Yeah, I like that.
I mean,
I wouldn't mind a wagon at some point that was pretty badass.
I
I
mean,
always thought those like 70s station wagons were pretty rad with like all the
Oh, I've
huge
had my eyes
glass
for.
roof and
I've had
stuff.
my eyes out for a 240 Volvo for a long time now, and those things are climbing up in price like
That'd
crazy
be
now.
rad.
But
That's cool. Well, instead of talking about Dodge Magnums, what's in the shop?
Scroll.
What's been going on?
I don't have too much of note really.
What
Currently.
elaborate, super rad classic car have you been working on?
Well, I've worked on. Let's see, it's been like what 3 or 4 days, maybe more. I've been working on the '53 Suburban a little bit, just kind of going through and just inspecting everything. Like it's starting to get used a lot more now too. It kind of took a little resting period, and I just wanted to like, if anything, confirm even more that everything's good to go because it's still like under a year build and it's got some serious power behind it, and I'd rather be overly certain than have a panic attack every time it leaves, even though it's not warranted. But
Does your boss just kind of pick and choose what he wants to take
Yeah, like
to the
every
office
day
that
is it
day?
a new
Like,
car. Or?
kind of. I mean, he cycles through like the Suburban's always kind of been like always in one that he cycles in. It probably gets driven the most. But yeah, right now there's probably 3 or 4 cars that he's cycling through.
okay.
Does he ride bikes too? Does he have bikes?
Yeah. He just got rid of a bunch of bikes, but he's got 1, 2,
I'm going to grab whiskey. Be right back.
4 running bikes, I think, right now.
Oh,
So
right.
like 2 are choppers, like 70 style choppers, and one.
What are they?
is-
What are the choppers?
They're both shovels.
Oh, okay. Nice.
One was built by Cuddy from Hippie Killer, like way back in the day. And that one like hit all of like the show tours and everything. It's called Two Face Bitch. It's a really
Okay.
awesome bike. And Then he's got one that maybe doesn't have a name. I forgot the guy who built it. Junior, I think it is. It's like this peach color bike. It's really cool. It's another shovel. And then he has FXRP.
Oh, that's right. That's super cool.
Yeah, that's probably, if he rides a bike, that's the one he jumps on. And then he's got a few other ones. He has a TR6 Triumph. I remember Max talking about the guy who buys Airhead had one. That one runs, but it just needs a go through, and bikes aren't really a priority for him. Let's just say that right now.
Yeah.
And then he has another one being built right now too.
Nice.
But
damn, that's awesome.
There's probably one or two. I think he's got a Yamaha flat tracker too, but that was never finished.
Well, shovels are always awesome.
Yeah, he definitely likes the
mine,
shovels.
Man. I had one for a while. I built I was pretty proud of it. I think that was actually the first like ground up bike I built. Like complete disassembly down to every nut and bolt, powder coat the frame. And I did that 3-4 years ago. And it turned out really good. It was really fun. But
yeah, was it? No, that's the one you have now, the maroon one.
Yeah, no, I don't think you. I don't know.
I mean,
I'll
I
send you a
probably
picture
saw
of it
photos.
sometime. It was a white one. It had a white tank, black frame, no front fender, like 12-inch apes maybe. It was a solid bike. It was great.
Yeah.
But I got kind of burned out on it. They're actually they're a great second or third bike, but it's not something I wanted to ride every day.
Yeah,
They're
bike
really freaking clunky bikes.
Yeah.
What bike is this?
We were talking about shovel heads.
Oh yeah.
How bad did it sump? If it's
Actually not bad at all, but it was because I rebuilt the oil pump and
Okay.
it had new
Yeah.
check balls in it and everything, and I seated them right, and it was actually perfect.
Nice.
But I know those are notorious for doing it. But yeah, this bike didn't have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just because nobody ever maintains the oil pumps on them. You
Well,
don't ever
absolutely.
do that until
Yeah.
it starts sumping, and then it's a huge mess.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Did yours do that, Max? Did yours wet sump when it sat and just fill up the whole crank with oil?
Yeah, and then you start it and it blew out. I had to put this little
Pukes oil.
clamp on the hose when I shut it off, and I would
to
take it
catch
off.
it. Oh, I see.
Nice.
That's actually not a bad move.
No, it's
No.
great.
You should just put a valve in line with the
Yeah.
fuel supply
I just
from
could
the
never
tank.
forget. At
That's funny.
one time I started and looked down. I was like, "Oh my god!" and yanked it off real quick. But
Oh, speaking of oil, remember we were talking about my Triumph? I got to pass this on because here's an example of how stupid I am. Remember we were talking about how bad my Triumph was burning oil and the cylinders were full of oil and all that crap. So I'm sending off the parts to our buddy Billy's buddy back in Nashville, who's gonna bore it out and get it all machined for me and everything. I put the rings in upside down.
oh my
No.
Yeah, I found it. I found the mark on it. I swear the directions on the Hastings rings
Said,
there was
wording
no
up
up or
or-
down on them. There was no
No
marking. I
way.
swear to God it said this, but I think clearly I'm just insane and it did not do this. I put both pistons. I had one compression ring upside down, and
Darn
I'm
it.
almost positive that's where why it was sucking
It was just
oil up.
gouging in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's-
man.
I knew this
Jeez,
was
that
my
sucks.
fault. I just can't believe I actually did something so stupid and I didn't catch it.
Yeah.
So, anyways,
Well,
I think
live and-
mystery solved.
Live
on
and
that.
learn. At least you know.
ruined
Yeah.
it.
I would rather know.
Well,
what
I mean,
the
it's probably
happened.
good that
I'm glad I know. I'm just really pissed off that I wrecked some expensive parts with.
Well, no
by doing
more than
stupid.
Devin when he took the compensator nut off the wrong way and blasted the
yeah, that'll.
He was
happen.
like, "No, it's this way." And then the second we broke it in half, he watched the video and was like, "Oops, it was." The
I
other
forget.
way."
Is the compensator the one that's reverse threaded, or is that the clutch basket? One of them
It's-
is.
It was the compensator.
I think the
that's
compensator
reverse.
is reverse threaded, and he was doing it like it was regular thread, right? And he
Yes.
cracked it in half.
It just exploded. It came off of there like someone just stuck a
That's
bomb.
funny. That was on his FXR, right?
His FXR.
Yeah. Well, because they're already on there so tight. I mean, they can't
Seriously.
take much more.
And then literally he opened up the video and was like, "Oh my god, it's the
Oh
other,
yeah, should have read that.
fucking other direction." I felt so bad.
Oh, that sucks. Yeah. Well, that's Harley's for you.
Yeah, I feel like I learned most of my lessons in life that way. Honestly, it's like
Absolutely, by doing it wrong and ruining something.
Always, always, always.
I'm getting a good crash course in how to screw up Triumphs, that's for sure. At least I'm fairly confident in this BMW I'm working on. Like, I've done enough of those. I don't think there's too much I can screw up on that. But we'll see. I mean, I didn't do very well on yours, and I thought
on the
maybe
slash
what I
5
was
forks.
doing,
Yeah, I was just gonna ask how those forks are.
well, they're fixed now that our buddy
yeah.
Barry, who knows what he's doing, fixed it.
Exactly. First
This
try.
is the problem. I'm dangerous enough to not be afraid to take anything apart, but I don't actually know what I'm doing. That's not always a good combination.
I mean, your last 4 or 5 bikes, you have gone the distance. Well, you did
It's
it with
just fun though,
the
you know.
Moto
It's just a
Guzzi
hobby.
Yeah,
I like
it's
taking
great.
stuff apart, and then it just snowballs easily. Like once I start doing it, it's like, well, if I do this, like why not do that?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to do it with the 73. I'm excited.
Well, I'm willing to do it to this Airhead because I really wanted a 90/6 is I think my favorite of all of them, and this one, Matt, our buddy Matt from Euromoto Electrics, donated to me a bunch of really nice parts for it. So I already had a leg up on a ton of cool shit for it. And then it was like, well, why not? You know,
Yeah,
why
you
not
kinda
make
have
this
to
one
at this point.
Yeah, so I bought the rest of the stuff I needed, and it's going to turn out nice. Suspension and motor will be done, and but I'm not going to paint it or anything. It's got really nice like patina, nice wear on the paint. Everything's
Yeah,
like
it's
perfect.
beautiful.
It just needs to be clean. So that's what I'm in the middle of right now.
Are you going to
But-
paint as you go, like paint the drive shaft or
I-
anything like that?
I have to because there's some rust on it.
Okay.
So I got to sand some of that down and paint some sections.
Nice.
Same
It'll
with
look
the frame.
good. You got it all.
But I'm not going to like paint the bike. The bodywork's great.
No.
I'm just going to touch up the frame and where there's a little bit
At
of
the-
rust and stuff.
At the most, I'd say if it's got good patina, and this is somewhat controversial, is clear coating the patina so it just kind of locks it in and saves it.
Yeah.
Like on the frame?
No,
the
like on the
bodywork.
Are you
tins.
talking about? Oh, well,
Unless it's not that great.
It's not
No.
patina like you're thinking, where like the old trucks have.
yes, it's not
Greenish
worn
rust,
to the
yeah.
point.
Okay.
We're talking by patina. I mean like
Faded.
where in the pinstriping where your knees would have rubbed on it, and
Gotcha.
there's some scratches in it, and
So
you know, it's
not
that kind of stuff.
So not patina.
well, I don't know.
normal
What's the
wear
word
and
for it
tear.
then? Okay,
No,
normal
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
yes.
Nice.
Jesus, tough crowd over here.
Semantics are big
All
on
right.
the show.
Okay, fine. no,
No,
not
Max,
clear
what you're right.
The
I mean, that
paint's in
is
too
kind
good
of
a
what
shape.
I'm thinking of is
it's the original. I assume there was a clear coat on that paint, right?
Yeah, that's a beautiful.
know.
It's
Well,
called
you're-
it's called Havana Gold. If you
76.
look it up, it's gorgeous.
Yeah, it's this rad like root beer brown color. It's
Yeah.
really nice.
yeah. And
actually
that's kind of a gray area when they switched to. I'm sure it's not a gray area, but in my mind it is when they switched to base coat, clear coat, or it was a single.
I think it's still
single
glass
stage where they
It's
have
glass-right
they
paint.
have
I have no clue.
they have the color and clear
In one.
in one. Yeah, it's always better.
I have no idea. I
Yeah.
know nothing about paint,
BMW.
but I'm not
always,
planning on changing it. It's pretty good. It's in pretty decent
Yeah.
shape.
Yeah,
BMW
you can
pinstriping
get out
was
of hand
always-
real quick when you start getting into paint.
I don't usually paint stuff. I'm not a
Yeah.
fan of because anything I do I tend to use quite a bit. I'm not really a fan of like trying to overdo nice paint and stuff.
Yeah, you start
I
kind
like
of
to-
getting scared to ride it.
It's not worth it to me. I
Mm-hmm.
like to clean it so then when it leaks oil everywhere, I know where it's coming from.
Yeah,
But that's about my limit. I don't generally paint other than that. But okay, wait. While we're on the topic of Harleys and bikes and shit, okay, I got to tell you guys a story because this was nuts. I think Max heard a little bit of this, but I decided to sell my Dyna. Right, so I've got this 98 Dyna, and it's a nice bike, but it's got the odometer is currently at 90,500, and the motor is an SNS 96-inch top end kit in it. And it was done at like 50,000 miles, 40,000, somewhere around there. And so anyway, it's got a lot of miles on it, but it's a nice bike. It's got a lot of nice parts on it. And
premium
I wrote-
oil always.
Always premium oil. Yeah, Castrol GTX 2050.
Seriously.
But it's reliable. Like it's a really solid bike. I rode it down to San Felipe last year. It's an excellent bike. But anyways, it's, not the easiest sell in the world with the mileage on the odometer and stuff. So whatever. I finally decided to put it up for sale. It's like got a bunch of oil leaks and stuff. And I'm just kind of tired of working on it and decided to sell it. And so I have it listed for a reasonable price, I think, and I get plenty of interest in it. So finally this guy last week and on Saturday, he messages me on Facebook, right? And he goes, "Hey, I want to come check out that dyno. It sounds awesome. Exactly what I'm looking for." So I'm like, "Okay, no problem." So he comes over, and I've sold 100 plus bikes, cars, whatever. I have never had this experience before. This was so nuts. This guy comes over, and he was fine on Facebook chat, right? Like he was asking, he asked a couple questions. He told me he was a Harley expert or something. I forget his exact words.
Of course.
But he clearly told me, I've had a bunch of Harleys. I know all about them. So I'm like, oh, cool. Well, then you should be able to look at this and decide if you think it's, right or not.
I've had a bunch of cakes, but I'm not a baker.
It was, dude, the second he said that,
Nice.
I was just like, oh no, this isn't going to be good. It's like at work when we have people tell us that they're a mechanic, like somebody returns a stator, and that Max remembers this. He did customer service for us.
God.
As soon as somebody says, "I'm a mechanic," and they're arguing about their stator or voltage regulator or whatever,
like,
you instantly know it's a shit show.
Yeah.
So as soon as he said that, I'm like, okay, great. But I'm like, oh, whatever, man, no problem. Cool. Then you should know what you're looking at. So he comes over. He was super fine on chat. No red flags. He shows up in my house, and he doesn't say one word to me. He says hi, but he doesn't talk at all. Like nothing other than says hi. So I'm kind of like, okay. He walks in wearing a Harley t-shirt, and I'm just
that he stole
okay.
from his daughter, probably.
Okay. And he walks in, says hi, he looks at the bike for 30 seconds, like doesn't look it over really at all. Doesn't say anything else to me, doesn't ask me any questions. And then he goes, "Can I start it?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, sure." And he previously told me he's a Harley expert, so I'm like, okay, then Harley didn't change their controls on these old bikes for like 40 years. Like if you started one, you've started a million. And it has an SNS carb on it, right? Like if you're a Harley expert, you certainly know where a choke is on an SNS carb. The guy couldn't figure out where the choke was. This bike has a lot of miles on it. All the labels are worn off the controls, so you can't read them, right? So he's like dicking around with it. He didn't know on a dyno the key switch was on the side. So I finally show him like, "Hey man, keys here, chokes here. This is the kill switch. This is the start button." "Oh yeah. Oh, it's just a little different." I'm like, okay. So anyways, I am not exaggerating this at all. He starts it up full choke, right? Starts it up. And this thing always starts right up. I had given it like 2 squirts of throttle. So it was ready to go. He hits it, starts right up, and no shit, doesn't let it warm up, doesn't let it idle, nothing, just instantly full throttles it, just bangs the throttle to the stop, and the motor is just like
blah, blah, blah,
screaming
blah.
on a cold motor
With the choke on,
and I'm just standing there like my jaw drops. I'm like, what in the fuck is this guy doing? This was nuts. And his buddy was with him. I forgot to say this. His buddy had showed up with him. So the guy's sitting there just abusing the hell out of the bike, just holding it like wide open, and he's dipping all around, listening to the acting like he's like testing it or something, like listening to it. And then his buddy taps me on the shoulder, and I'm yelling at the guy like, "Dude, stop!" And his buddy taps me on the shoulder and pulls me away, and he goes, "That's a really sweet bike. Why are you selling it so cheap? What's wrong with it?" And I'm like, well, there was nothing wrong with it until this fucking dude showed up and started doing this. And I kind of push him away, go back over, and the dude's still railing it, and I turn the key off. And it dies, and he's like, "Oh, the bike died." And I'm like, "I turned the key off, dude. What are you doing?" And he was just like, "I'm testing it, man." And I'm like, what are you doing, man? Like, you need to let this warm up for a minute. Like, that's nuts. Like, who treats your own bike, let alone somebody else's, like that? And he's just like, "Dude, I'm testing it." I'm like, okay. I'm like, let's let it warm up for a bit.
Testing it to failure? Or like, what's
I should have booted him out right away, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't. And then, so we started up again, and it's like, I let it sit there and idle on the choke. Luckily, this motor's excellent. He didn't hurt the motor, but it was just ridiculous. His buddy pulls me away again to keep asking me what's wrong with the bike. The dude's choked full on. He instantly starts railing it again, just blasting the hell out of the motor.
I think you were on camera.
The bike
I was
is
just going to
blowing
say, is this like a
black
prank
smoke.
video? Or like,
I kept looking around thinking I was on Punked or something. It was nuts. The bike's now blowing black smoke out of the exhaust because it's so freaking rich from all this throttle and the choke on. And then his buddy starts going, yeah, you don't have it jetted right, man. Like, look at that thing's blowing smoke all over the place. Like, that's way too rich. And I'm like, well, if you didn't have the fucking choke on, this wouldn't be a problem. And I'm yelling at the guy, like, stop. And I go back over and I turn the key off again. The transmission vent had started puking oil, and because I use this purple Synchromax stuff from Royal Purple in the trans, so it's bright purple and it's clean, and it's puking oil out of the trans vent underneath it. So there's a puddle of oil underneath it, and then I take the key out so the guy can't start it again. and then he like looks around and sees the puddle of oil underneath it, and he goes, yeah, something's wrong with this, man. Like, look at all that oil. And I was like, dude, you just completely demolished my bike. Never in my life have I revved it. It was literally bouncing off the rev limiter. I have an Ultima ignition on it set at 5,000 RPM rev limit, which I never hit in normal riding on that bike. And I'm like, dude, like, you just did something I've never done to this thing in the 20,000 miles I've owned it. Like, that was absurd. I don't know why it was puking oil out of the transmission, but it had to do with what you just did to it. And he's like, yeah, man, this bike's in really bad shape. I'm still kind of interested, but I'm not paying what you want. I'm going to have to think about it. And then he just walks away, just walks straight. Him and his buddy just walk straight out of the garage. And I'm just standing there like, what in the world just happened?
Yeah. How do you
like,
recover from that?
It was insane. I still can't figure out there was some scheme here. I assume it was to try and convince me the bike was broken or something and lowball me, but he didn't make an offer. His buddy told me it was priced too low, and I was clearly, I knew something was wrong with it. I still can't figure out like what the game was here. There was some scheme, but it was totally nuts. Never heard from him again. Never messaged me, nothing.
We could do a full-on episode just on buying and selling stuff on Facebook Marketplace.
Dude,
the mutton heads you get coming over.
But what was okay, from what I just said, what was the plan there? Like, what am I missing?
He probably doesn't know anything about Harleys. His buddies talked to him that he needs an old Dyna. He doesn't know anything.
Yeah, because Dynas are the best Harleys apparently.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I'm glad you see it that way. I sense detecting some slight sarcasm, but
listen. I don't know what the best Harley is anymore because it changes every month. I don't follow.
It's an Evo motor dyno.
I don't follow
will agree with me
the chatter on the floor.
Brady, don't you like Sportsters?
Yeah, greatest bike ever made by Harley.
Greatest bike ever. There it is.
There it is.
There it is.
There it is. And there it is. Okay, whatever. Anyways,
that is wild.
Ridiculous.
That is wild.
It was nuts.
Yeah.
It was nuts.
Yeah, we should.
I've seen somebody do something like that.
We can go back to our episode on buying your first bike and never, ever do that.
Yeah.
When you go to look at somebody's bike, be cool.
Well, respectful. I was telling Ryan this story the other day on Monday, and I realized I had a bad feeling about this dude the second he walked in. Just the fact that he like said one word to me, didn't ask me anything else about the bike, and asked to start it. And I realized, like, okay, I learned something there. That's a weird one, but if I get a weird feeling about somebody who does something like even just starts that way, done. I'm not. No, you can't start it unless you give me cash in my hand.
Yeah,
and you're buying
exactly.
It. So. I had a weird feeling and I ignored it because I thought he was legit and he clearly wasn't. But
did you get
anyways?
Did you get the leak fixed? Did you figure out what it is or anything?
No, it's still not. It had to do with him wailing on it in neutral, which was why it was puking out of the trans vent.
Well, yeah, I don't probably what is it, like aerating.
That's kind of what I thought.
And then it just...
Because you had no other gears spinning except the input shaft, right, to the transmission. And I think it just whipped all the oil up.
Yeah.
And the input shaft is directly below where the vent is on those. So my thought is it just was whipping up so much oil from... And no other gears were spinning, so it wasn't pulling, like, kind of collecting anywhere else. That's my thought. So no, it's puking oil everywhere, but it's all from the oil filler on the oil tank that I haven't fixed yet. But no, the trans hasn't leaked a drop again. It's just he just definitely abused it. But that really pissed me off. Like, I was so freaking mad after that guy left.
I remember you've got on our chat
because it was the most disrespectful thing somebody has ever done to anything I've owned. like, and to do it right in front of you, I was just like, holy shit.
Can you
Well,
go back
he is
and
an
leave that
expert,
guy?
so
You can go on
maybe-
Facebook
maybe he
and leave
just
him a
knows
bad
more.
review, right?
Yeah, probably. I didn't, but yeah, that's
yeah, I
probably a
think
good
you
idea. I almost messaged him because we had my brother-in-law and some other friends over for dinner, and I was drinking a bunch, and I was just like, oh, I'm going to fucking light this guy. I was about to start messaging him and just like, I was getting
you're the
madder and
master of
madder
that.
about it.
I love your arguments with people. They're so fun.
It's just like, I'm going to demolish this guy. But I didn't. Whitney was like, don't message him. Don't do it. You know, that's stupid. You're just going to start a fight. And I'm like, well, okay, yeah, but he totally deserves it.
Remember that guy from Texas? You got to do it.
Yeah, that was great.
That was great.
Some guy, I was selling this old Ford truck, and this guy from Texas starts texting me, and he's like, he offered me like half of what it was listed for or something. And then I said, like, dude, no, like,
He got
no,
all
I might
pissed
knock
off at you.
$500 or something. And then he goes, oh, whatever, man, it's a piece of shit anyways. Like, I wouldn't buy that. And I'm like, well, you literally just made me an offer. So I
you
think
literally just
would.
wanted to buy it.
And we got into this text fight about it, just calling each other names and stuff. And the guy was funny, and we were like arguing back and forth for a while. And then at the end, I was like, you know what, dude? I really enjoyed this. Like, this was hilarious. I had a great time. How about I knock off $1,500 or something, because this was awesome. And then he never answered me again.
Oh,
and then
man.
I sent it all to Max. I was like, Max, you got to see this. This is awesome.
It's pretty
It
legendary.
was funny.
That's
yeah,
when you
I
need
like that
to-
idea, the selling shit episode, to talk about all the
Oh my
insane, ridiculous stuff people have tried to pull selling
I
vehicles.
bet if we
No,
open
I've never
that
had-
up for comments, it'd be just insane.
Yeah, I've never had anything remotely close to something like that happen.
Really?
Ugh.
Well,
Yeah.
good. I mean, that was
Yeah.
that
I
was
mean, that's
horrible.
terrible. Most
That
of the
was
time, it's just
really
people
bad.
who are like, I'm on my way. And you're like, okay, you sit there. And then you sit there. And then you sit there with your thumb up your ass. And then they're like,
Yeah.
they don't ever call. They don't show up. They don't do anything.
Yeah.
It just, I'm like, what is the point of you telling me you're coming
Yeah.
Up
Exactly. I'm missing the
over-
voice right now.
over and over again?
Have you seen the like?
Bachelor was on.
Yeah.
There's all these like screenshots of people where somebody dicks them around on Facebook or whatever.
Yeah.
And then they say they'll sell it to them for super cheap, and they give
Yeah,
them the
yeah.
address of like a comedy club or something. And they show up and they're like, "Why'd you send me here?" And it's like, "Cause you're a joke."
Yeah. No, I have seen those. Those are great.
That's awesome.
I wish I would have done that to that guy.
All
All right. Anyways, that's what I've been doing.
Max, you've been
what about you?
been working on your Eva
just been,
or
you know-
not Evo electric vehicle.
Yeah.
He's been charging, I bet.
Been
I've just been
charging it.
cruising around.
He's been hard charging.
Honestly, I know it sounds dumb, but like, this is like all foreign driving to me.
Yeah.
Like I've been, after 30 years of driving, it's like, it's just all wacky. And so I'm definitely getting used to it, like when to charge and where they are around town. And, but the car is sweet. I mean, it's just it's like the easiest car. It's like an electric go-kart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just shred around in it all day. I
Did you get
take
the
it all way-
220 hookup put in?
No, not yet. I still got to do that. I've got the
Okay.
cable, but I drove it down to Boulder for band practice, which was pretty fun to see if it would.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was great. Just drove to Boulder and back with no gas, which is always nice.
Yeah, that's cool.
Honestly, I'm ready for a project, man. I'm going to pick up that R75.5 BMW, and I'm just really, I'm
Yep.
ready to. I need to get my hands busy. So,
Yeah, that thing's
yeah.
gonna be sweet.
I
Post
ordered-
you need to log into the Instagram account. You can post a picture of it on there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I will.
Yeah, I'll give
I
you.
posted
I'll
some
give
stuff
you the
yesterday.
password right now.
Yeah, it was really long. It's the weirdest
Yeah,
password
it's
I've
Pretty
ever seen.
secure.
It's very secure.
Yeah, ain't
Nobody's
nobody's
gonna
guessing
get in
even the
there.
first 5 things.
No. All right. Well, how about we talk about our topic tonight?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we should
so
just
we-
disclose that this is going to be all Brady.
Yeah. This I know nothing about this or very little.
Yeah.
So
well, I'm kind of in the middle of doing I'm not in the middle. I haven't started on it yet, but I've been for the past. I mean, maybe we'll call it 6 months. Been collecting information parts to. Well, I guess we'll say the topic. So we're thinking this is going to be a little bit of a series on forced induction. And the first one we're going to be talking about is turbocharging.
Yep.
So since we just mastered maintenance, Generally, the next move, at least on everyone's mind, is let's freaking make more power.
Yeah, might as well.
I know how to not kill
it's
it.
very rational and logical. So and also like this is going to be a fun one. And like you guys said, you don't know too much about turbocharging.
I've had 2 turbo diesel trucks. That's it. And I had to do no work on them. So
yeah,
on the turbo, anyways.
So
Everything
I'm not
else broke.
necessarily getting into turbocharging for diesel so much, but it's all the same. It's doing the same thing, not even differently, but it's just yeah. I mean, I guess it's the same thing. So this could apply to diesel and
is there some
turbocharging.
difference in a diesel motor turbocharger versus a gas motor turbocharger?
Do you know what? I really don't think so. Just that turbo sizes, which we're not going to get into here, plays a difference. I'm sure the turbos are specifically designed for diesels, and some are specifically designed for.
I figured there's some thing,
petrol
but
or
I know they
fuel.
operate on the same principle, right? But I assume maybe like the design of the vane for the compressor is different or something.
So yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like the turbo, like compressor and the turbine are sized differently to fit its application better.
Right.
Which honestly, I don't know that much about turbocharging and selecting the right turbo enough to tell you which one is better, to be honest with you.
Well, that's fine.
But
let's talk about how it works, I guess, is more important at the moment.
Yeah. So
identifying
identify
turbo for your application.
Yeah.
Since we couldn't help you with that anyway.
Dive right in.
All right. Well, what is forced induction?
So forced induction in quick is forcing air greater than atmospheric pressure. So that typically at sea level is 14.6 or 14.7, which is just atmospheric pressure. That's just the air around us right now at sea level. So it might be a little different in elevation where you guys are, but not by much, to be honest with you. Or 1 bar. So one like bar is generally used in like select countries and like around the world. I could name them off to you, I'm sure. I know Sweden is one that uses bar rather than PSI. Pounds per square inch is what PSI means.
Is that like metric versus standard measurement?
Yeah,
kind of thing.
Exactly. And bar, I don't know what that stands for. I'm sure it's like barometric.
I assume it has to do with barometric pressure, which they use for like air pressure for weather and stuff, right? But I don't know anything specific about it.
And honestly, it's probably a more accurate measurement because you're not dealing with decimal. Well, you still are, I guess, but it's just a much broader scale. It
would deal with higher pressures more easily.
Yeah, definitely. Anyways, aside from the point, so it's forcing air greater than atmospheric pressure into an engine. So more air means you can put more fuel in, so you can get the mixtures right, and means more combustion. So larger or more burn in the combustion chamber, which equals power.
What would happen? I feel like maybe this is just me, but it'd be easy to miss the point that you have to increase fuel to match, right? When you're doing
because you still have to balance the air to fuel ratio.
So probably stupid question, but what would happen if you bolted a turbocharger on something and did not? So let's say we had a car or something that ran perfectly fine before doing that, and then you add a turbo and you don't increase fuel whatsoever. Is that going to be so
super
lean?
I mean, if you can get it to start. It depends on how much.
Right?
So it depends on how much additional air you're forcing into that engine. So
sure.
if you're putting like 2-4 pounds, something like that, and this is probably different with every engine because of the compression ratio in the cylinder itself. Yeah, I mean, it would probably run. You likely would see an increase in power, but it's definitely not treating those internal parts very well at all.
Well, and how much can like a stock fuel injection system can compensate for some of that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
By adjusting fuel to match air intake, but
so there's
by
some
like what margin?
I mean, I think each system's different. Like a lot of the standalone systems, like let's just say like your self-tuners, like your Holly that you have on your Falcon, I think can adjust up to 20%. I don't know if that's in total or each way. Like trimming, probably trimming 10 one way and then 10 the other. So adding or decreasing.
So pretty quickly, if you're adding any reasonable amount of boost, you are absolutely having to adjust fueling to
100%. Yeah. And so I purposely didn't want to get into that necessarily because that's tuning. And that can take up a lot. The purpose of this is more just kind of introducing or just explaining what it's doing minus how to make it safe, I guess. Make it safe power. And that's pretty much majority of that is in the tune. Which if it's a pretty popular car too, like there's definitely like turbo kits that they'll give you a flash to put, like you can flash your ECU.
Oh, right.
Or even if it's carbureted, you're kind of for the most part on your own there. But or a knowledgeable tuner can do that.
That seems pretty difficult.
If you do
to tune a carbureted car for
not necessarily because
turbocharging,
it really isn't, and actually more than likely it's easier to tune a carburetor under boost than it is EFI.
How's that?
Well, because that's working off of parameters that just are naturally created, like working off of vacuum essentially or positive pressure. So a carburetor, there's two different styles. How like under boost, there's a draw through style where the carburetor is before the intake of say whatever is creating the additional air or boost compression, let's just say. Or there's a blow through style
where it's pressurized on the input side of the carburetor. And so, which I assume is better, right, than the blow through.
You'll see blow through style more often than draw through, because not every application can even house that. But with draw through, the carburetor doesn't know any different. It doesn't know that it's. It just thinks, okay, I'm on a larger air compressor.
I see.
So realistically, like, not realistically, but for the most part, you need less adjustments on the carburetor if it was running pretty decent pre-boost.
You could just scale it up by however much.
Not even, because how a carburetor works, it's receiving more vacuum, so it's just allowing that much. It's drawing or pulling in that much more fuel because of it. This is assuming that the carburetor is able to flow that much more air.
But you'd still have to rejet it to compensate for how much.
So I mean, I haven't done this.
Moving, right?
I haven't done this before, so I can't say for certain. But the only reason you would have to adjust is because you generally want a richer mixture under boost to make power at least. Well, not necessarily if you have variables, like if you can adjust timing, like variable valve timing or ignition timing,
you can compensate for some of that.
Then you can compensate for some of that. Not necessarily it's going to be optimized, but it can prevent you from blowing up. But if you're running a carburetor and you've got variable ignition timing and variable valve timing, you're not running a carburetor. Really, what it comes down to.
That's true. Okay,
so
wait, I see your point though.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably outside of the scope now. like,
so we we can have a
discussion.
100%.
It's outside the scope of how this works.
Yeah.
Okay, I agree. I just think it's interesting because I don't.
I
love
agree.
To, do
like
one
it's
someday and figure out how to tune it. So I've got all this. It makes me think of all these questions. Like, how would you?
Yeah,
do
and
that,
a draw through setup too, like on a carburetor, like a draw through, like it's just I don't know. It looks so badass. Like a lot of the old VW bugs, they're turbocharged. A lot of them use like a draw through style. It just looks so cool.
I was a couple years ago. I looked at this dude had a Trans Am turbo. So it was the 301 Pontiac motor or old motor or whatever. That small V8, and it had a draw through turbo setup on it, and it was the first time I'd ever seen it. I was looking at it and I was like, because I think before then I'd only ever seen a blow through like pressurized system, right? That had like everything routed to the top and a pressurized intake on top of the carburetor, and that's what I expected. And I was looking at this and I was like, what in the world is going on here? Because everything is routed to like the plate,
probably like individual
the
runners, like directly to the head. You can get away with that. You don't even have to run it through a traditional intake manifold.
It was what was so weird was okay. I could totally not be describing this right, but this is why it blew my mind because I just never had seen this before. It looked to me like a carburetor setting on top of what I would call a space, like a carb spacer. You know, like you typically see like a, not ceramic or whatever, but like a 1-inch spacer or whatever, and then a standard intake manifold. And that spacer was where the turbo like was ducted to.
Whoa.
So I was looking at it and I was like, what in the world is going on?
Yeah.
But it was actually pushing the compressed air into this like spacer plate kind of thing below the carburetor, but above the intake manifold. And then it looked to me like a pretty typical V8 intake manifold.
And what was this on?
It was a turbo Trans Am.
Whoa, that's wild. Actually, it
was a stock motor. I looked it up because I was like, "What in the world is going on here?" And I just had never seen it before. And that was look up a stock turbo 301 or whatever turbo Trans Am 1981 or something.
I mean, it seems very inefficient for sure.
It was. That's what I was looking at. I was like, this seems like a horrible idea. You go to all this work to add a turbo, and it's like the worst way to do it. And apparently, it was pretty bad. It was not like
but they were probably thinking packaging wise. Because that's definitely something you have to think about when you're, especially turbocharged. Well, honestly, supercharging probably in most cases even more.
Well, I think their point at the time was get reasonable gas mileage and use an off-the-shelf GM V8 they already had.
Yeah.
And like none of it was designed to be good. It was just using like off-the-shelf parts. Anyways, I just thought it was interesting. I'd never seen that before. And I was like, holy shit, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to get into because it'll be a bit like early like turbo, like factory turbo options.
Yeah,
they were honestly more experimental, if anything.
Seems like
it was such a newer kind of induction that there was a lot of kinks and everyone was trying things their own way for the most part. But
yeah.
So let's keep going.
What's the difference between a turbo and a supercharger then?
So a supercharger, technically speaking, is like at the top of as category wise. Like a turbocharger is a supercharger. A root style blower or supercharger is a supercharger, of course, but. So technically they're all supercharging because you're supercharging the air. But generally speaking, turbocharger, supercharger. But just to add a little bit of confusion, they're all superchargers.
Yeah, that was extremely confusing.
Yeah.
So what is the
So I wanted to at least like say that so we can get it out of the way.
Well, they're both in that category of thing, right? But
technically
my
speaking,
simple understanding is a turbocharger is compressing air based on using exhaust. Right,
Yeah,
to
so
spin the compressor.
exactly.
And supercharger's engine driven, right, off of the crankshaft or something.
Yeah, generally the crankshaft. I mean, I actually don't know of any supercharging
is there
system.
any alternative to that?
I'm sure there is, but I don't really know.
Oh, well, electric. You put that note there, and that's true. I've seen those before. That's super cool now.
Yeah. So, so generally, when you're talking about forced induction, you're talking about turbocharging and superchargers. I won't get into the technicalities there. I didn't expect that.
Fair enough.
But there are, and I probably used the wrong adjective. I used like some fringe alternatives, but maybe just not as more experimental, I guess, because it is kind of more so in the experimental stages of different types
common,
of forced induction. So the first one you mentioned is the electric supercharging, which is we won't get too much into it because our next one will be on supercharging. It's more of a centrifugal supercharger that also has similarities to turbochargers, which we're going to get into. But just instead of driven by the motor, usually by the crank pulley, it's driven by an actual electric motor.
Yeah, which seems like genius, right? Because you're not
sacrificing
itself.
You're not sacrificing like a parasitic like power loss from having to drive an additional turbine.
You're already running
essentially,
an alternator.
or compressor.
That load already exists. I mean, that load will increase by needing to charge a battery to then run an electric motor. So I guess there's some increased drag. But
the problem with running off an alternator, there's not enough amperage in the standard alternator that I know of that would produce the amount
Haas electric motor,
produce any kind of boost that would be worth it, really. The ones that I have seen, or at least packaged, it's a self-contained unit. So it has its own battery pack.
Interesting.
That either you mount you mount anywhere, I guess you can. And then and
you just charge separately, not part of the vehicle's electrical system?
Yeah, or you can still hook it up to the charging system, but you have to wait for it to build up.
Well, that would make sense for like racing applications and stuff, where you could run a battery down in a race or something. And
I mean, one of the main issues with racing is you want it to be as light as possible, and it's kind of I guess if you're familiar with like Formula One and the KERS system, it's similar to that, I guess, because you have it's not like you don't have full boost all the time. You have like moments of boost, or like nitrous, I guess. Like you have a limited supply until you regain the power needed, let's just say, to charge it back up.
What is it called? I know nothing about F1. What is
KERS? I believe it's called. I'm pretty certain it's KERS. So that's actually an electric motor connected to the drivetrain, or it could be to the drivetrain. So it's a passing boost. I guess.
Kinetic energy recovery system.
That's what it was.
Oh, but that's braking recovery. That's okay. Interesting. I see.
It's pretty much when you brake, you coil up a rubber band and then you let it go.
Interesting.
Oh wow.
So that's kind of electric supercharging. It's still in its infancy. I doubt there's people actually buying them and installing them on their cars.
I'd never heard of it. I know we sponsor these dudes through work that have an electric. They set the land speed record for electric. What was the deal with it? No, it was a gas motor. It was a Ski-Doo snowmobile engine with an electric supercharger, with a electric motor supercharger on it.
Yeah,
and they have the land speed record at Bonneville for the snowmobile class, which I didn't know was a thing, but they have a class for like tracked vehicles, and these dudes out of Sherbrooke or something in Quebec have the record. It's pretty weird.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, the only reason I could see them using electric supercharger rather than say the typical supercharger run off the engine is that the increase in power outweighed the additional weight it costs to do that system. There's extremely expensive too, so it's not really like a consumer market
Not
base
practical,
yet.
but yeah. That's pretty interesting. Though.
And then I didn't expect us to get so into electric superchargers, but I'll mention the other one that's just pretty cool. It's honestly more like nitrous, if anything, but it is by means of increasing atmospheric pressure or greater, creating air compressed greater than atmospheric. So it's an oxygen induction. So what that means is I've only seen maybe one guy really mess with it, or one company, I should say, and it was a long time ago.
Okay.
So it's I don't know, gas bottles or oxygen bottles, I guess. So like your
you're like
scuba
feeding
bottles.
The intake with compressed air.
Yeah,
pre-compressed
exactly.
Air.
So you can have
That's
like 900 psi, possibly even more, into a tank.
Yeah.
And then just through like a regulator, you can just pressurize the intake system, and it's pure oxygen too. So that's what you're after also.
Yeah.
And so that makes it even more efficient, but of course, super costly, super heavy, and really short bursts. Like you're going to have to fill that tank, and then, I don't know. I mean, pretty quick. I don't know how many. It depends on the size of the tank.
Is that for like drag racing? Would they use it?
Yeah.
That's.
So, I mean, as far as I'm aware, no one's really using this system seriously at all. But
I wonder what the gain is versus nitrous. You know, like what is that like a huge benefit over any other power adder system?
I'm sure. I mean, I've only seen it one time, and it's probably one company, which is probably just one guy. Experimenting with it. It was really fascinating. The only reason I really brought it up is because it would be something really cool. I watched the YouTube video years and years ago on it. It's really interesting. So that's the only reason I put it out there. Because, I mean, it is essentially some kind of, or some form of forced induction. So
yeah, same thing. All right, well,
so let's get to the topic. I was really hoping we didn't do a two-parter, but it's kind of chalking up to it.
If it happens, it happens. I
You're
got too
right.
many questions about this stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Hey, and honestly, like that's kind of.
I like talking about it because I don't know. Even if nobody necessarily knows the answer, it's still interesting to talk about.
Yeah. So what a turbocharger is, essentially is an air compressor powered by a turbine and then spun by expelled gases from the engine. And so we'll dive deeper into like how all that process works as we continue.
I think just the concept of it, I think is super cool because you're taking advantage of something that's happening anyways.
I love it.
You know,
exactly.
Like that's what's so cool to me about it is you're using something that's happening no matter what. It's already a waste
product,
waste product, right? And then you're using it to generate, more power essentially for the motor. Like that aspect of it, I think is pretty rad.
Absolutely, that's why turbochargers it's considered free power, not necessarily expense because it can get pretty expensive. But as far as you're not using additional power to make more power. You're using a waste product to make power.
That's so great.
Okay, here's the real question. You know how I know everybody here has heard this, how like if you have too much back pressure on your motor from the wrong exhaust or something, like is sacrificing power or whatever. We don't need to talk about if that's true or not or whatever. But
okay, so that
I know some of it is, but
but
is the load of a turbo what I'm pointing at is like is the load of a turbocharger on a motor actually sacrificing some power from the motor because it is not as free flowing. You know, you're putting some obstruction in the way, even if that's spinning really efficient turbine blades or whatever. does that actually detract something from the motor? Like I assume it does, but you're gaining so much more that it's irrelevant, right?
Yeah. So where that does come into play is like your turbine housing size. So if, of course, a larger turbine, more area it flows better. I think that makes sense to everyone.
But if you undersized it or something, you could restrict.
You can restrict it, yeah, and that's where you'll start to see the power curve kind of plateau, because no more gases or flow can get through the turbine because it can't push that much more or pass that much more flow through it. Yeah. So that's where you'll see like a plateau on like a dynamometer where the power just kind of starts to plateau, and that's so the benefit there is where like turbo sizing can be pretty important with where you want to make the power. So a smaller turbo or turbine housing will spool up faster. So at lower RPM, you'll see those power gains sooner. With a larger turbine, it flows a lot, but you'll see like peaks start to plateau later in the RPM range.
Well, and it'll be slower to speed up, right?
I'm sorry, on the smaller turbine, you'll see faster spool up time, so you'll see power earlier, but then start to plateau in the higher RPM range. That
makes sense.
With a larger turbo, you need a lot more gases to actually spin the turbine. So you'll see the power gains higher up in the RPM range. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, depending on what your application is, that's the main factor of how you pick which turbo size you want to use. And there's ratios for that too, like as far as like actual boost going into the intake that you're making compared to the exhaust. So what you were talking about, back pressure, compared to the exhaust pressure between the head and the turbine, the back side of the turbo. So generally, like efficiency wise, you want it to. I don't know this part 100%, but generally, so a higher ratio. So let's say a 2-to-1 ratio. That means 10 pounds of boost going into the intake, but the exhaust manifold essentially is seeing 20 pounds of pressure. That would be a 2-to-1 ratio. So, and 2-to-1 is kind of your limit. Like you don't want to go past that necessarily, but you have more pressure on the exhaust side, which actually propels the turbine that's propelling the compressor side, which we'll get into, kind of going backwards here. But you'll have a quicker spool up. And then so say 1.5-to-1 ratio, it's going to take longer to spool up. And there's some efficiencies within that. That's where I don't really know everything or much, really, I'd say. I know enough to, I guess that's where I don't know anymore is what I just said. So, I mean, there's a lot into it, definitely. But for the most part, like there's a lot of this stuff you don't necessarily have to know, because this is kind of where you see what other people are doing. And as far as like turbo size, like picking, but if you really want to get into it and really hone in, that's where you need to go deeper, and that's kind of some of the stuff that you need to really be knowledgeable of to be able to tweak it. And so you can also change compressor size or turbine size and mix and match them for the most part. Not of course with all of them, but
this might be
and that's where you can kind of fine tune it for your application and engine as well. So that's where like fine tuning comes in. Go for it, Max.
Can you add turbo to any engine?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Okay. I'm sure you like technically can.
Yeah,
right? But some motors probably don't.
It's where
because it doesn't shit like your camshaft could come into play, right? Like there's all sorts of things that would affect like it really taking advantage of
well, not necessarily.
Right?
Yes and no. So it's essentially, so here's kind of the rule. Of course, it's not 100% because turbo systems are not 100% efficient. They're really efficient, but not 100%. So atmospheric pressure is 14.6, 14.7, something in there. I even looked it up and couldn't get an accurate reading, but we're not worried about that tenth. So say you have a naturally aspirated motor. Let's just say it makes 100 horsepower. And say you have an appropriately sized turbo for that engine, and then you give it, say, 14.6, 14.7 pounds of additional boost.
Mm-hmm.
What you should see is double the horsepower of naturally aspirated because you're doubling the amount of air going into that engine. Again, it's not 100% efficient, but that's somewhat of a guide. I think realistically, like as far as gains, you double the horsepower of it naturally aspirated, like at 20, 24, 25 PSI, something like that. It could be lower. It depends on how efficient that application is. But that's kind of just like guesstimates, I guess.
Right.
Guesstimates.
I'm playing around. There's all these turbo size calculators that are pretty rad, actually.
It is. No, it's super cool.
Calculator.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of. Everybody that sells turbos has one. It looks like, and you can
it's
put in
AR.
all the specs.
AR, I think. So like, what's the turbo's AR or whatever, and that's like the.
Well, this one, airflow like lets you calculate how much airflow rate for a given boost pressure, and then you can determine like what turbo they have that falls into that category.
Yeah. So essentially,
you can also
like,
set target horsepower. You can set target horsepower for your size motor.
Yeah.
And then just let it figure out everything else based on
Exactly.
that. Which seems dangerous without specifying more
does.
things. But
Yeah.
This is pretty rad.
So, and it's kind of like you can see a lot of the times too, like this turbo can make up to or support up to say 600 horsepower.
Right.
And that's because that's the allowed flow through that turbocharger that will max it out before it just you start building pressure. You start like because that flow's got to go somewhere, and it gets backed up in the manifold. So that. And you can calculate horsepower by the amount of air being allowed to flow, because that's essentially you just add in different formulas for that after too. But, so that's why like capable of up to 600 horsepower, and it's usually sometimes categorized different turbos in that range.
Right.
And that is somewhat universal too, because your limitation will be the amount of flow in the turbo, so it doesn't matter what engine you're putting it on.
Right.
And that's why you can double it on a twin turbo setup, and then capable of essentially 1,200 horsepower with that same turbo.
Interesting.
But
so what about? I like this section on the like cooling and lube for the turbo, because what I was wondering is I swear I've seen self-contained turbos that don't require any of that, right?
Yes. So
that is a thing, right?
Yeah.
But I know some do hook up to an oil feed or something from the engine.
Yeah, the turbo in my GTI was oil cooled and it failed.
So generally, like, I don't know necessarily how it would be separate. It doesn't have to be. So turbocharge, can I run through like, just like the three major or main components of a turbo? So I haven't really even got into that.
I guess I did. Yes. No. Do that.
So there's three main parts, let's just say, and they all have parts within them, of a turbocharger. First one being the exhaust gases flow out of the manifold. into a turbine, which spins, and that's called the turbine or turbine housing. It's all considered the hot side because that's where the hot gases.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Are spinning the turbine. And then in the middle, there's center housing. And so what that houses is the shaft that links the hot side, the turbine, to the compressor wheel, and the compressor side, the cold side, which is not actually, that's not considered the cold side because it's not quite cold. But that's the compressor side. Let's just call it what it is. Yeah. And that's where you're going to have typically your bearings and your the journal bearing, ball bearing, whatever it may be. And that's kind of where we get into like how to lubricate and cool if applied. And then you have the third component. This is your compressor side. So that's usually like the aluminum side or shiny side, the one that takes air out of the front of the compressor, and this is where like it's considered like a snail also because of the shape of it. Yeah. So what that shape is doing is taking high volume, low velocity air, and then as it goes through, getting sucked in from the compressor wheel, it's converting that into that shape is converting that high volume, low velocity into low volume, high velocity. And that's where it's not necessarily like a Venturi effect. I'm sure it's some kind of effect that's named. I just don't know it. And so that's what builds the booth. So you're taking all of this volume and then just cramming it, funneling it into speeding it up. And that's where it just forced induction, forces all of that volume into the intake. So that's essentially how it operates, the speedy version. If you want, as far as I'm aware, there's 3 main types of turbochargers as far as the like essentially bearings. So there's the journal type, which is what you'll find most of the time. It's been around for a long time. They're generally the cheaper ones. Not that they're bad, but you have to be more cautious of cooling and lubricating than, say, the others.
Are they like limited on RPM they can spin or something?
Not really. I mean, I think really before you start seeing issues of it not being able to move in higher RPM is limitations elsewhere before that happens. As long as you have efficient cooling and lubrication, it'll take it to the moon. And then you have ball bearing, which are just more of a stable setup. So journal bearing, it actually is, there's no physical contact between anything, that shaft. It's actually just floating on a really, really thin layer of oil. And if we get to it, we'll dive into some of the benefits or cons, I guess, of the different types. And then ball bearing is more stable, so it can typically take a little bit more abuse. Because it's actually physically supporting it. Exactly.
Bearing.
And then there's ceramic bearing. So those are the ones that I think it was you, Evan, that mentioned there was like an oilless system. And I think it's comp turbos. They're really the ones that are kind of the more known for it. Those ones are definitely, I don't know too much about them. I just know that they are by far the most expensive ones. Mainly, I'd say probably just because of material used and it's a newer technology.
So the ceramic is some sort of like closed loop self-lubricating thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it must not wear out if it doesn't have, an oil feed to it or something.
Yeah.
Or at least not for a very long time.
Exactly. So they aren't that common, to be honest with you. They're going to be on your higher end, applications, because they are dramatically more expensive. And honestly, because it's probably going to be used more in a racing environment, they don't need to withstand those levels of heat prolonged.
Oh, yeah.
And this is me just guessing for the most part.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
But
you can use stuff like that when the service life is like after every race, as opposed to 100,000 miles.
Yeah, definitely. So more commonly, you're going to find journal style turbochargers in a manufacturer setting. One, because it's relatively inexpensive, does the job, and it's not necessarily after.
Yeah,
like
probably
peak
not crazy
performance.
high. Yeah, crazy high power levels. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're after more efficiency, not necessarily. In most
Right.
cases, they're after efficiency, not necessarily increase in power. I guess not necessarily. It's probably
increase
evenly
in
split,
power
but
from a smaller displacement motor or something, but they're not necessarily going like the main goal is
Yeah.
not to create massive
give
power,
it just
right? It was
exactly give it the
to get
freaking-
acceptable power from a smaller displacement motor or
definitely.
something.
And
That
that's
makes sense.
and that's usually tagged along with like variable ignition timing and cam timing.
Yeah.
So you can run a leaner mixture more safely, so it's more
Right.
efficient.
Right.
And forced air induction helps with that.
Right.
So to get to what you mentioned as far as the lubrication, and we touched on it already. I hope does that make sense as far as like the different types that are out there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, with the main thing I'm interested in, I guess, is oil lubricated turbos. Do they share oil supply with the motor? Or
yes.
does it have like
so
a separate
I'm sure there
reservoir
are
or
some
something?
systems that have like a separate oil pump, but it's not necessary. It definitely does. In most cases, it shares engine oil with the turbo.
Okay.
So if you're running, pretty much like if you're adding a turbocharged system to your application or to your engine, you're going to pull from of course, pressurized outlet of the motor to the turbo.
Oh,
And then
okay.
generally they're gravity drained. So that's why when you locate your drain port and this is all happens in the center housing, where the center housing primarily just houses the bearings for the shaft,
Right.
whatever style it be. So you feed it on the top, oil fed on the top if it requires, but typically speaking, that's going to be for the most part. And then it's gravity drained. So you want, of course, the path of least resistance and let gravity do the work. So
Right.
you can have, I don't know if you call it blow by, but like, I don't know. Like you can, if you see like a turbo smoking, from the exhaust,
Yeah, you can get
generally,
oil being pulled into the compressed air side, right? Like
not
through the bearing or
necessarily.
something?
How they're designed, it doesn't generally work like that. I can't tell you exactly how. I just know that it generally just gets burnt up it just gets pushed through, let's say, on the turbine side, where that's the hot side again, and so you're gonna get the smoke coming out there. But And that's if, like, say the shaft gets worn, the journals get worn, like that's when you're going to start having issues. Or it's not properly draining the oil, so it's got nowhere else to go if not out. So that's when it starts getting past the journals. Because generally speaking, they don't really, like, the sleeves or the seals that they have are they're not like tight seals. They're just like, I don't know, metal washers for the most part.
Yeah, but if that stuff wears enough, there must be a path for oil to get pulled through.
Yeah, like anything that's supposed to
compressed
seal,
side, right?
if it gets worn out, it's going to leak. But it's the same concept for the most part.
Right.
But it's generally
Okay.
the oil is not meant to necessarily cool the turbo. It's essentially just there to provide lubrication.
Right.
Now, not all systems have water cooling. You see it definitely more often now, but it's not necessarily a new thing, but it's more commonly seen now.
I had no clue that was the thing, that there was liquid cooling.
Mm-hmm.
Like sharing coolant with the car's cooling system.
Yeah, so
That's
same
interesting.
concept
I had no idea that was
as
a thing for turbos.
Well, here's the thing. So it's primary. I might have even actually done it or put it down in the notes. Yeah. So this is actually really cool, and I knew that water that there were liquid cooled like turbos. I thought of it pretty standard, like it just cools the turbo, keeps everything within its heat tolerances. But it definitely is, for the most part, it's not to cool the turbo while running. It's for when the engine is turned off. So, like heat soaking, you're aware of that. Like metals will heat soak, and generally, like generally speaking, it's usually the turbine is like a cast. And the center housing is a cast iron. And those things, like you can see temperatures drastically rise just when there's no more heat source in it, heat soaked. So to help,
what does that lead to, like bearing failure or something?
Exactly.
Like, what is the
So
problem
you
that-
can, it just puts a lot of extra heat on all of those essential parts of the turbo. And so I don't know if you remember this or heard of it, but maybe in the 80s, I think it was even like a factory thing, like in some vehicles or heard of a turbo timer.
Yes.
So
I had a buddy with a Mitsubishi Spider or something.
So with
Had
a
one of
turbo timer, all that was doing was pretty much when you turn the ignition off, whatever, it keep the engine
for a
running.
while.
So what that would do?
So that was cycling coolant through the.
No, it wasn't cycling
Through
coolant.
the
It
turbo?
was just keeping it running at a low RPM to help cool it down and still provide lubrication to the turbo.
Oh.
So because you can overheat that oil, as if it's not passing through, it's just going to sit there and
just so you didn't let it sit. With,
exactly.
bake.
And that's
Okay, that
generally
makes sense.
speaking, if you were really
Interesting.
beaten up on it, like you can just destroy like those seals and also say the.
So they must had like a preset based on coolant temp or something, right? Like if you parked the car and it was over a certain temperature, it would let it run for whatever, 10 minutes or something.
Likely temperature off of the housing itself or the center housing of the turbo.
Oh, there'd be a
'Cause
temp
that's-
sensor on the turbo itself.
And because
shit.
I mean you can see temperatures of well over 1,000 degrees on these all day long. So what it's doing is it's just I'm sure there was like intervals set where you program it to like, okay, just run for a minute after shutdown or until like temperatures reach this point. So those days I guess are of now of old. So water running coolant line to your turbo. This was really cool, and it's kind of something that I had just recently learned before doing these notes. So you run your coolant lines, but I forgot what it's called. There's some effect or whatever. You run you want to run it at 20 degrees roughly for this to work efficiently. I'm sure it'll run plus or minus whatever. Or
20 degrees meaning what?
So it's based, and I don't know the theory. It's what I forgot. Is 20 degrees is like the sweet spot of thermal siphoning. So that's what it's doing is water at
But 20 degrees, what do you mean?
Like
Offset
Fahrenheit?
I'm
from
sorry.
vertical
So
or
the
something?
entry, the
temperature.
entry of coolant and exit of coolant. So they're 180 degrees opposite of each other on the turbo housing. I'm sorry,
Okay.
the center housing. So you just
But
want
you're saying
those,
20 degrees off of vertical. So their
exactly.
inlet and outlet are like offset a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. And that helps it push and pull coolant more
At
efficiently
that
through the
exactly.
housing or
There's someone really smart that figured this out, and I'm too dumb to even remember explain it right now. But
I wonder why that
its
is.
job is to operate within thermal siphoning. So I believe, well, it wouldn't matter actually.
But if it's pressurized from the
So this is
vehicle's
after
cooling system,
the.
why the hell would it matter?
So this is after the vehicle is off. So when the motor shut down, and there's that coolant, so when it hits that really hot center housing, it will just by this effect that I don't remember, causes the water to get drawn in and then pushed back, so it cycles through, and so there's a continuous cycle of flow going through the center housing via
even
coolant.
without the water pump on the vehicle.
Exactly.
moving.
Yeah, it's super cool. Damn it! I
Until a
wish I
certain
had.
temperature, and then it shuts off, or just
Well, yeah.
Yeah, is this
until
related to
it-
the turbo timer thing, or like what? Just when
so
it cools
that
down
the
and
turbo
off?
timer is what this system is doing essentially. So the turbo timer is just to give it time to cycle to cool down.
But what you're talking about is not related to the motor running at all. It's a temperature
Exactly.
based
So it's just
thing.
an
Okay.
effect that, and it's called thermal siphoning. So when the motor's shut down, there's no pressure, there's no water pump running. This process, it just keeps a continuous flow going through the housing to help draw out and extract some heat from it.
Got it.
And so what I've heard, because I haven't done it yet, when you shut the motor down, like you can hear like the flow going through the turbo.
Right.
With nothing running, nothing pressurized in the system. It's really cool, and I wish I
How
could
do people
explain
come
it
up with
better.
this shit?
I know.
That's awesome.
Exactly.
That's really cool. I've never heard of anything like that.
So yeah, I mean that was I thought it was just like what you normally think when it's like liquid cooled or like a liquid cooled turbo. It's like of course it's just an additional source to help keep temperatures under control, but its main purpose is when the car shuts down to essentially just add life to that turbo, because it'll still be fine without water or coolant running through it. But it helps eliminate some of that extra wear and tear from just letting it bake in there and help save some of those parts.
Right.
But and I know for diesels a lot too, like turbo timers were a real thing. But pretty cool. I thought that's kind of
that's
like
interesting.
that was
I've
like
never
something
heard
I
of
had
that before,
learned
but
more
that's rad.
recently. That was just like, dude, this is fucking awesome.
nice.
But
So, what about the cooling thing is interesting because like everybody's heard of intercoolers and stuff, but like what I get why you do it because you're certainly heating up air when you're compressing it, right? Makes sense.
yeah, so as you compress anything, you increase friction, and friction pretty much you get all those little particles rubbing together creates heat. So you have this charged air, but you put hot air into an intake, you're going to run into some issues.
But
not
I thought
only
the point of that was that with the hotter air,
the less dense air.
right. So the cooler it is, also the more air you can
dense.
fit in the same volume,
Exactly.
right? But if you're already compressing it, why the hell does it matter?
Well, because you got to look at intake temperatures. So hotter air going in, it's cooling down. Excuse me. I mean, that's how you create or knock or detonation, is hotter temperatures going in will, depending on these, like cooler air, not only denser, but you're more likely to detonate because that charged air is at a much higher temperature that you can actually ignite that mixture as it starts to compress. Because again, it's getting compressed again with the piston in the combustion chamber.
Right.
And
does every turbo or forced induction system use some sort of intercooler or something to drop?
Not
the
necessarily,
intake
and you don't have to run one. But if you're seeing increased boost levels, so say higher PSI, that air is going to be that much more hot. And so now you're stepping more into that territory of pre-ignition or knock or detonation.
Well, and it seems like most modern systems use it, so it must
absolutely
be a pretty massive improvement, right?
Oh,
to bring
100%.
the temp back down.
But if you're running pretty low boost and also like packaging is an issue, because it's essentially like you're trying to fit a massive radiator into, say, a package, and also the piping, you have to go in and do a bunch of plumbing as well. But if you're running relatively low boost, say it's just a little, it's more for fun or whatever. Because there's definitely a lot of even factory vehicles that are turbocharged, since they're running so low boost numbers that they don't have intercoolers. So it's definitely, you're able to do it, but you'll get a lot more efficiency out of it. So like even on a factory turbo car that has an intercooler already in there, there's an intercooler upgrade. So it's just a more efficient way to cool down that air, that charged air even more. So you have lower temperatures and also denser air going in, so you create more power.
Hey, I see. I'm just looking at the second page, which we have a ton more. And just FYI, we're at 1 hour and 40 minutes.
Oh yeah. Well, I was thinking some of this stuff we do need to talk about, wastegate and blow off valve and stuff. My question was, does that stuff? I feel like we should move the rest of it into talking about superchargers. Does some of that stuff apply to superchargers as well?
Not necessarily.
Or no.
And different types of superchargers. Blow off valves come into play. Wastegates, that's pretty much, or that's
a
just turbo thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I mean, it's a good stopping point, I'd say. Because we just got through the cooling.
The rest of that with superchargers. We'll talk about it next time.
And we're gonna need a 2-parter on this one. Ah, shoot, that's not really. Yeah, we really got ourselves in a corner on this one, boys.
That's all right.
That's all right.
We can finish it up next time. Wait, one more question about intercoolers. I feel like this is a stupid question, but I've always heard the air-to-water intercoolers, right?
Yeah.
Does that have to do with the vehicle's cooling system?
So there's different ways you can do that.
Is that like using a radiator, like with vehicle coolant?
Yes and no. So
That's your standard answer. Come on, Brady.
That's a simple question.
So your pretty standard intercooler is going to be air to air. So it's air flowing through the intercooler, being cooled, those radiator fins, exactly, and cooling the air. That's your standard. You're generally going to only see water to air or air to water systems when you're making really high boost. And for and do you know what? Those systems usually are separate. So you have a separate water pump and a separate tank, and you have a water tank that generally has some like ice water in it. And so you're pumping, say,
actually pumping super
cold that you're not going to get from the air.
Got it.
Flowing through the intercooler that's adding a much more cooler.
But then you must capture it in a separate tank or something afterwards.
No, it just
right?
cycles. It just
hot?
cycles through. So it's like a return system. And then like after, say, you melt all the ice, which it melts pretty damn quickly.
I would expect.
You drain it, fill it back up, and replace your ice.
Which again must be like a racing application thing, right?
For the
like
most part, yeah.
Nobody's doing that in their
exactly
like Ford Focus. Or whatever.
And if you're running a air to water system, you're also running like you've got the ECU program to look at air temperatures, like intake air temperatures, and adjusting the tune to that, which most electric fuel injection systems do already. But you're controlling that based off of your temperatures more so with like pulling timing and generally, like I said, these are more like higher boost pressures. Because that you're compressing that air so much that the charged air going into the intake is so hot that it becomes very inefficient at that point. And adding a shitload of stress on that motor for very little gain.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
But
all right, right on. Well, yeah, let's call it here then because we pushed hour 40. But yeah, no, this is cool. I've always got a ton of questions because I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
But all right, yeah. Well,
do you know what we've only got
on turbochargers?
I can knock these out in 5 minutes.
I'm fine finishing it. We don't have too much left.
Yeah. I mean, really,
I prefer to start a new topic on another episode.
Yeah, it's not enough to really for a two-parter, but I can knock these out. So these two are essentially the next ones. I think Max and Evan mentioned wastegate, blow-off valve, boost controller. That's kind of self-explanatory. There's lots of different systems for that, but that's more just manipulating. There's probably a lot to it, but there is. But it doesn't matter. I won't get into it. Pretty much just controlling the amount of boost that goes in, and that actually has a lot to do with potentially the wastegate. So boost controller and wastegate can play a part together, but you don't need a boost controller to run a turbo system.
But is boost adjustable? Like
it is. So that's
a boost controller setting the maximum amount, right?
Yeah.
That it can produce,
and
which is also the point of a wastegate, to blow off pressure at a certain level or something.
A boost controller does is modulate how the wastegate operates. So generally a wastegate, what it does is it's on the it's before the hot side of the turbo, the turbine, and usually on the manifold, or it has to be on the manifold. So as flow increases turbine speeds and boost levels, built up, say, pressure going into forcing flow or flowing into the turbine, a wastegate allows a gate to open to help control the amount of flow going into to spin that turbine. So higher RPMs of the turbine generally equals more boost. So that's a way to control how much boost you're allowing into the intake via.
But how would the controller actually adjust that on the fly?
So
you can't mechanically change the spring pressure or something, right?
So a wastegate has a spring. So once it sees, say, a certain amount of boost pressure, generally, like when you just buy a wastegate out of the box, it's gonna likely have like a 5 or like 7 pound spring in there. So that's when you
Yeah,
hear
you'd overcome the spring pressure and open a valve.
exactly.
Or
So
right?
that's when you hear like, oh, it's just this boost is just run off of wastegate pressure right now. So it's only set at like say 7 pounds. It doesn't open until after 7 pounds, and then bleeds off or vents the additional gases that are trying to come out. Reroutes those gases essentially either back into the exhaust system or in the atmosphere. When it's in the atmosphere, it's usually called a screamer pipe. So what that does, is that it modulates the speed of which is allowing the turbo to spin.
Right.
That's what I have right there in the notes.
So then what's the difference between that and a blow-off valve? And are they both used in the same situation, or are they two options for the same thing?
They're modulating, well, they're doing two different things. The wastegate is controlling in which the speed of the turbo can spin, essentially limiting the amount of boost going into the intake. Okay. And then so once you have boost going into the intake, a blow-off valve, which isn't always necessary in a system or required, so that's designed to eliminate what's called compressor surge. So when you hear someone revving up a turbo engine and then they abruptly let off, you hear that you're like that's all of that compressed air running into, let's just say for this instance, a throttle valve on the throttle body. So it's just blocking it off. I got nowhere to go. So that compressed air has to go somewhere. So it goes right back to the compressor on the turbo and then blows all of that additional pressure out of the intake of the turbo.
Okay.
And that noise is coming from it going through the compressor wheel and everything, and it's just the noise it makes.
So the valve is actually between the compressor and the intake?
Yeah, so
it's on that section of
exactly.
tubing or whatever?
And so what the wastegate does, it's hooked up to the reference is hooked up to intake manifold. So after the carburetor or after the throttle body. And what it's doing is just referencing between pressure before the throttle body, let's just say. And once those pressures are different, then it'll try to balance those two out. So what it does is, like the wastegate, it opens up, and there's a spring in there too, just to like, generally a lower spring, a pound spring. Let's just say 2 psi. I'm sorry, not psi, but 2 pound spring, and that's just pretty much just to soak up the slop, so it's not just like opening when you don't want it.
Right.
It's probably more than that, to be honest with you, but. So once that it has a difference above, say, whatever spring is in the blow-off valve, then that valve opens up and then releases that boost or that compressed air into generally atmosphere. I didn't get into recirculators, which does a similar thing, just because I was concerned about time and warranted.
So, but what is the main, what is the main function of the blow-off valve? I guess I'm missing this. Like, what is it protecting against or whatever?
It's to prevent or help prevent compressor surge. So that's going back through the inlet of the turbo. And what that does do is it adds a bunch of stress to that,
like to the compressor,
exactly,
like turbine blade.
To the shaft, to the bearings, especially if it's a journal bearing turbo. It's floating on just a thin film of oil.
Right, and if you make that not spin smoothly or something, you could
so it's really jarring to the turbo, and so it just increases wear, or it adds excess wear. And it hurts response time. So when you get back onto the turbo, all of that compressed air going back in through the turbo, say going back out of the turbo, it slows down the compressor wheel, which is hooked up to the turbine. So you have to wait for it to spool back up. So it can create additional lag. So you'll have a much more responsive system on off throttle. So yeah, it's just another efficiency thing. It's a protection thing. And so I think that roughly covers it. I mean, you let me know.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. No, it answered a lot of my questions. I think that was awesome.
Thanks for hanging in there, Max.
No, it's great. I enjoyed listening to all that. I don't know. I've had one car with a turbo my whole life. I don't know anything about it, so it's fascinating.
Yeah, I've never done any work on one.
Yeah, and how you set up a system,
I really know nothing about
how you set up a system is it can be different. Where on a mostly on the manufacturer's side, they're going to be looking into like efficiency, and more on the enthusiast side. If you're adding a turbo, you're looking for power.
Make power.
So it's a pretty
sense.
fun way to make power too. Like I mean. The power curve looks usually a lot different than, say, a normally aspirated motor. So you and tail kind of have to drive the throttle or use the throttle a little bit differently because that power band usually can have, like, don't get me wrong, like a really well set up turbo system for that application. You can have a beautiful curve or power band. And it operates similar to a naturally aspirated motor, but generally you're gonna see like hits a certain RPM, and then you're just gonna see that thing ramp up,
take off.
Where you kind of.
I loved having turbo trucks. Was awesome. The turbo diesel trucks were great.
Yeah,
they weren't worth all the maintenance that they needed otherwise.
Exactly.
But they were.
Well, you need yourself a turbo.
They were
timer.
pretty fun to drive. Yeah, apparently I never did.
But
all right, right.
yeah,
on.
turbos are fun. I'm building a system
I think that was cool.
collecting parts to build my first turbo system now. So I've been researching turbos for almost 20 years. Like
it's going on your old Triumph, right?
Yeah,
Fun.
TR10 estate wagon, super rare.
That's gonna be
I think
awesome.
that's the first time I said the whole thing, but yeah, I mean, I've been into turbos since my VW days, before my last VW got taken from me by the state. I was planning on turbocharging. That was 20 years ago.
Nice.
California stole your Volkswagen. All right, I'd like to hear that story.
I would love to share it. It's
okay. Next week, I'd love to hear that. All right, well, let's call it. So, all right, that was our intro to turbos, and hopefully you learned as much as I did because I know nothing. But that was pretty.
Yeah,
great.
Thanks
I mean,
for
they are
leading that charge, man. That was great.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I mean it's super fun. It's fascinating, and it makes really good power when you do it right too, which is
that's
awesome.
what's cool about it. Nice. Well, right on. Thanks for checking out All Wheels Podcast. We'll be back next week. And check out allwheelspodcast.com. Check us out at all the podcast stores or sites or whatever you want to call it. Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever else you
follow
got.
us on Instagram, Facebook.
At All Wheels Podcast on Instagram. If there's someplace you want to see the show posted, let us know.
Yeah,
because we want to put it up everywhere.
We'll reach it out.
Yeah, and shoot us an email, contact@allwheelspodcast.com. And we'll be back next week, and we'll talk to you then.
All right. Take her easy.
I'm feeling alright.